why are we doing it? It's to improve something about their sprint, not to directly or necessarily improve the time of their sprint. And it's to improve the quality of the reps of that training session. If an athlete runs, I'll use the example of a 1-3-5 flying 10, you do this intervention, 2-3 rounds of it, where you go intervention full speed, and their form is just greatly improved, but their time is like a 1:40, which still isn't that much slower. Was that a better training session, or was that a worse training session? If the quality of their reps improved, you're playing the long game, and this is just trying to speed up that learning process, I guess, of could an athlete potentially benefit from all drills and interventions? Yes, but by being a little bit more intentional about it, I guess you're just trying to accelerate that curve by giving them specifically what they need. Welcome to the Talking Shop podcast, where I'm here to share stories, lessons, and experiences in sports performance and professional development. I'm your host, Matt Tomets, and today I'm joined by myself, Ryan Solo, for this episode. Something a little different, coaching intervention-based speed and agility. So a little bit more X's and O's than what I usually do, but this is the product of recent discussion with coworkers, and I'll get into this later, but something that I've just recently been doing a lot in my work 6 days a week that I think has some value, kind of just sharing something of a little bit different perspective on how to coach speed and agility, how I do it, how some of us do it at the facility. So I'm excited to get into it, something a little bit different, and hear your feedback, you, the listener. Yes, I am talking about you. So I'm excited, something a little different. So disclaimer, right off the bat, I cannot take credit for this idea/strategy. I 100% have to give the credit to Steve Breitenstein, my mentor, boss, colleague, whatever I want to call him, wizard, and Lee Taft, who is just the legend of coaching speed and agility. And I think that Steve actually got this from Lee as well. So I'm just super grateful for the phone call that I had with Lee, just the many conversations, and just in and out of the facility, just watching Steve do his thing coaching. So I definitely learned a lot from it, and it's cool that I've been able to act on it as well. So I guess I'll take 1% of the credit. And that's one of those things where it's when you have these phone calls with these people and they recommend these kind of, not fancy, but they talk about what they do and these different methodologies, philosophies, whatever, et cetera, you have to act on advice, if you believe in it. So that's where I guess I'll give myself the 1% credit. So operational definitions, right? We have to know what we're talking about, or you have to understand my context in which I'm explaining intervention-based speed and agility. So an intervention, I guess, I would define as something separate from the full speed movement intended to improve the full speed movement. So this can be anything from a drill, a cue, or variation of that drill, or I guess anything else you could possibly think of that you would do separate from the full speed movement. So let's say a sprint and agility drill, whatever it may be, something intentional you are doing that is not that to improve that. And speed agility, top speed, acceleration, change of direction, cutting, everything under the sun. And I'm using this in comparing and contrasting to a more traditional speed and agility model where it's you do your, I guess, intervention or drill variation for that day. You do your 3, 4, 5, whatever reps. You do your 3, 4, 5, whatever full speed reps of that movement for that day. You get some water and you move on to the next thing. So this is just in comparing and contrasting into that quote unquote more traditional model. Disclaimer number 2. So I only feel comfortable coaching this style because I coached an extremely well-designed speed and agility program to a T for 4 years. And looking back, I had the program with me. I put the program on the ground. I coached the drill, watched the kids, run over to my program, look at it, get the sets and the reps and et cetera, et cetera. And not only did I do that, but it was very well designed. I was having conversations with my colleagues, and I just felt very comfortable with all of the progressions, the regressions, different categories, how to organize a speed session, how to run a warm-up, how to plan different days during the training week, how a traditional, a warm-up exercise specific to the speed that day is different than like a pre-main exercise would go, how you would use different progressions, regressions, how you could progress the progressions depending on the athlete, how to tweak. So I just been doing this relatively for a while, I guess. I don't want to say 4 summers is a long time, but it's more than a little time, I guess, if I want to put it that way. So I just learned a lot. I felt super comfortable with it. This is not something that, if you told me this, 1 summer ago, I'd be like, that sounds impossible. How do you do it? So that's my next disclaimer. So here I have these pretty little flow charts that I found in PowerPoint. And intervention based, kind of the flow of it, or what it looks like, is you start with the intervention or the drill or the specific cues that you individualize to each kid. You go do the full speed movement, you revisit that intervention, you go back to the movement, you go back to the intervention, etc., right? So that's kind of the flow of it. I don't know if we want to call it a superset or a contrast or whatever makes the most sense to you. Or you can actually start with the full speed movement first, and that'll help dictate or help you decide what intervention you want to choose moving forward for that day. So you start the movement, you do your intervention, you decide, you go back to the movement, you go to your intervention. So they're literally the same circle, but the starting point can be different depending on what you're feeling that day. It's a little bit more advanced group, how comfortable you feel, so there's 2 ways that this could usually play out. And this is the main question. Are you coaching the program or are you coaching the athletes? And each athlete is going to be their own type of mover. They're going to have their own strategies in which they attempt to accomplish things based on their strengths and weaknesses. And it is up to the coach to put it all together with their coach's eye, their own coaching philosophy, style, to pick an intervention that they feel comfortable with, as well as one that they feel will be successful with that certain athlete in that situation. So it's really just giving the athlete what they need that day. And whether it's not being able to predict how they're predicting 4, 8, 12 weeks in advance, how they'll be moving on a specific day, or predicting how they're going to progress through a series of progressions for a specific drill, or just assuming what corrective they would need. If you're programming for a general class and you get a bunch of random athletes, like how do you know what they're all going to need? So I know that this sounds a little bit more free-flowing, and it's funny that I'm a super box thinker, and I'm starting to get outside the box. Thank you to all of my conversations with Steve, the wizard himself. But it's a little bit more free-flowing, but your athletes are free-flowing. They're humans. They change sometimes within a session, but also and specifically, weeks at a time. So just a simple way to put it, like are you coaching the program? Are you coaching this piece of paper to these athletes? Or are you coaching the athletes relative to this kind of framework of your program that you have on the piece of paper? So I know it sounds like free-flowing and all this kind of stuff, but just whenever it was said to me like this, it just made a lot of sense. Like I'm coaching who I have in front of me, and I'm going to have a philosophy, whatever you want to call it, to help me coach them the best that day. So here's an example. So let's get into a little bit of X's and O's to help kind of bring some things full circle. And this, I just use acceleration. This isn't to say that all of these are correct. This is just to help wrap your head around kind of what I'm talking about. So let's say you have someone who's a heel striker in acceleration. You could do some ankle jumps. Get them on the balls of their feet, get them feeling springy and what it's like to hit the ground, not on their heels, on their midfoot, forefoot, balls of feet, whatever you want to say. So just slowing it down, keep them in place to what it should feel like. You could go to an A march and A skip. You're still moving, but still relatively a lot slower, and just coach and overemphasize the foot strike. Or you can give them a cue. Hey, I want you to land in the middle of your foot. Like, hey, point to the middle of your shoe. That's what I want you to smash the ground with. If someone's a little boundy, they just take these monster steps. You could say faster elbows. One thing that I've found is when you coach, I want you to take quicker steps. Their stride length just super shortens. So if we can keep them pushing and not really coach their legs too much, because you can obviously move your elbows a lot faster than you can move your legs. But your elbows and legs are both going to move in sync. If you try to move your elbows faster, chances are your legs are going to pick up because they're not going to be out of sync. So if you want someone to increase their step frequency, I found just saying step faster doesn't really work. So you could say faster elbows. Or you could just have them do seated arm action. Just crank out fastest elbows in a hallway you can possibly do. So they have that, feeling. You're like potentiating their arms. I don't know. Or a banded A run. Keep them in place. A little bit of resistance, but they just gotta try to get as many ground contacts in as possible. Someone's really choppy. You could do a thigh split skip, basically an exaggerated A skip, focusing on, getting the knee up as high as possible, splitting the thighs, hopefully to influence getting kind of bigger steps, at least in the first few steps. Bound to sprint. If you want them to take bigger steps, well, a bound is literally the biggest step possible. And then you could turn that into a sprint as a progression, or you could say, hey, if it took you, I just made up 14 steps to get to the line. This time I wanted it to take you 12. I want you to get that much farther in every step. So that's a cue. Someone has kind of bent over posture. A march, A skip, really just emphasizing the posture. You could do a wall march, a wall switch, just really isolate, they'll have their hands up, but they can really feel that angle, but also what it feels like to be straight. You could say, I want you to run and get your hips to the finish line, right? So if they're bent over, chances are the hips are behind them. So just that cue to run kind of with their hips, and hopefully that'll bring them forward a little bit. So there's just a quick example of how depending on what they're presenting that day, you have options, cues, drills, and variations of that movement. So I know what you're thinking. Oh, well, are you just picking random exercises and how do you progress from there? And I have my systematic variation to go from drill to resisted drill to potentiated, whatever, contrast, And within this, there can still be systematic progression. And depending on if you choose to adopt this, you can say, okay, I'm going to have level 1 of my, and kind of like I did here, level 1 of my interventions, level 2, level 3. And I'll go through this beautiful table I made. So within this, intervention based, what the athlete is presenting to you, there can still be systematic progression. So in acceleration, I guess we'll stick with this example, right? You can work on step length, you can work on step frequency, foot strike posture, kind of just like the previous thing previous table. So if you want to increase step length, right? Phase 1, you do a triple extension 1 step, on the line, starting stance, just really exaggerate, trying to go as far and fast, 1 step, hold the finish. Then you can band that as well, or just do a thigh split skip, right? Really emphasizing splitting the knees, splitting the thighs, bigger steps. Step length, you could go to power skips, right? 10 skips for distance, really projecting forwards. And then that would be level 2, and then level 3 would be a bound. So a little bit more challenging than skips, but still that horizontal kind of max component. So a bound and a bounded sprint would be like level 3. If you want someone to increase their step frequency, you can do the seated arm action like I said, phase 1. Phase 2, just A run in place, basically like super fast high knees, but I've been calling them high toes recently. Just trying to get as many ground contacts in like 4 seconds. Phase 3 would be a banded A run or something kind of like that. Foot strike, right? The most remedial progression or regression, a march, a skip, emphasizing the foot strike. Then you could go barefoot, so just where they really can't be striking on their heels. You could do maybe a shorter acceleration barefoot. And then I don't know if you'd want to put the shoes back on for the sprint and go on and off, but just a variation of the drill. And then phase 3, depending on how you want to order these, whatever. This isn't the point. Could be like a plyo. Can you be quick, twitchy, short, explosive, whatever? And chances are, if you're landing on your heels in a plyo, it's not going to go very well. And then posture. So there's a wall march, switch, whatever. Slow it down, no movement at all. Next would be a march, a skip, focusing on that posture. You're moving now. And then resist, release. Because they're being resisted, they could really hold a better body angle, and because they're not running full speed and it's not all of their own weight, you could really emphasize getting the hips forward in line with the body. And then when you release them, can they maintain that going forward? So that was just an example of helping you just wrap your head around how this can be systematic and it can progress. So cues as interventions, because this is one of those things that I referenced earlier, I would qualify as an intervention, even though it might not be as obvious as the drills and variations. And I stole this from Steve again. He's who I see 6 days a week, so I have a lot of conversations with him, and he's super smart too, which is very convenient. And I was chatting with Steve about cues and how quick do you expect cues to work, and when do you keep hammering the same cue versus like when do you mess around with different cues and saying it to one kid versus the other kid, and there's cues that I gave to one kid but then the whole class, and just like all these different things about just like the value of my words. I don't know if I've been just more hyper aware of that when I coach, but one thing he said that really resonated with me was there's no bad cue. There's cues that are better or worse for universality, right, for groups, and there's cues that are better or worse for individuality. So, and no shame in my game using this quote. So there's cues that you're more likely to use with big groups. At the beginning of a session, hey guys, 1, 2 big rocks. This is the one cue I'm going to be focusing on for everyone. And there's cues that probably aren't going to work as well for those big groups. And there's cues that you can be super specific and might be really good for that one athlete. And you say to the whole group, like, probably not the best cue out there. So not only within picking the right drill variation for that athlete, the right intervention, similar to how you kind of give feedback. And if you decide to use a cue as your intervention, you have to be just as kind of intentional, specific individual with it as well. And it's interesting to kind of compare and contrast just thinking about cues like that. Like they're all tools in your back pocket, but just how you wouldn't use the same drill or variation with everyone, well, you wouldn't use the same cue with everyone either. So it was just a really cool light bulb moment when he said that and it clicked. So just another tool in your back pocket. So my experiences in doing this intervention-based speed and agility. So first, being conscious of kids feeling left out. And this is just one example. You learn with the experience, you learn by doing. And I think I had two kids doing thigh split skips, 2 kids doing bounds, and 1 kid doing ankle jumps. So the first 2 kids doing the thigh split skip, they were a little choppier. I need them just to feel like exaggerating, splitting their thighs and their toes. 2 kids that were a little bit more advanced, but needed them to extend and project, so that they did bounds. 1 kid, super heel striker, just had to get him on the balls of his feet, just feel what that felt like. And it was this kid, I think it was his first or second session. and I told everyone, I was like, you're doing X, you're doing Y, you're doing Z. And then I was over by the kid doing the ankle jumps. And I said, go. The 4 kids did the thigh split skip, the 2 kids did that, the 2 kids bounded. And this kid's just like doing ankle jumps. He's kind of just like, why are they all running over there, and like why am I still here, and why am I stuck next to the coach? So So just being conscious that there is that individuality, but you still have to respect the psychosocial components, whatever fancy term we want to use. And that it does matter, if it's a new kid, if it's someone that's not as confident in themselves. And there's some kids that are going to eat this up, that, depending on how you communicate with them, why you're giving them that drill. But that was just not funny, looking back, or just in that moment, I was like, oh, dang, like I don't know if I should have done that. But you learn by doing, and I want to share that with you. Learn from my mistakes. And it won't always reflect an immediate improvement in time. This is one of those things that I also found where let's say we're doing top speed, and we'll do 2 flying 10s. Everyone remembers their best time. We would go through hurdles. We would do some ankle jumps, some tuck jumps, some single leg cycling, just to try to get whatever I feel they needed, or just give them a cue. Like give them a little bit longer rest. I want you to focus on this. I want you to focus on that. I want you to focus on that, etc., etc. And then they'd run back through again, and it would be like a 1-3-5, and they get a 1-3-6. It's like, and it's super interesting that, like, speed and agility, a PR is expected, not like explicitly expected, but expected every rep, or even like once a training session. And it's like, well, if the timers weren't there, would you still be expecting that? And kids will get a little bit slower, but their form just improved dramatically. I'm like, no, that was awesome. Like, I know you're a little bit discouraged, but like, no, that's what we wanted to do. And I think that brings me to my next slide. The second bullet point on this slide. But first, being intentional about communicating that everything said is done specifically for that one person. And it's funny. I've seen this, and Steve shared some stories, but you have athletes that are kind of overhearing, athletes that aren't as advanced, but they think they are, and you give the advanced athlete a cue, and then the not advanced one, like, okay, yeah, like, I can do that. It's like, no, you can't. Hence why I didn't tell it to you, so in stuff like this, I don't know if I'm one of those coaches that's more open to sharing the whys, but saying like, hey guys, all of this stuff, I know it's different, but it's what I believe is the best for you right now. So I'm going to be saying a variety of different things, but just listen to what I'm telling you specifically. So telling them to cover their ears, put on the earmuffs, whatever it may be, and just like, it's for you, and it's not for that other kid. And what I'm telling that other kid isn't for you either. So just a consideration, like I said, in this, doing it full speed, live, in this kind of group model, just being conscious of that these kids can hear everything, and they're going to think sometimes that they're more advanced than they are. So just something you learn only from experience. And then going back to my previous points about, it's not always going to reflect an improvement in time. And just like rep to rep, it's not always going to be faster, even if you just keep going. And I guess, like, why are we doing an intervention? Or what is the real goal of an intervention? And the goal is to improve technique or a specific aspect of their sprinting. And notice how for acceleration, the categories of interventions was their choppy, their boundy, their foot strike, or their posture. It wasn't, there wasn't a category that just said they're slow. So I think just understanding that this intervention-based methodology is based on specific techniques or aspects of their sprint to improve. It's not like, hey, you just pick whatever you think will make them faster. And I feel like explaining it like that, like, why are we doing it, is to improve something about their sprint, not to directly or necessarily improve the time of their sprint. And it's to improve the quality of the reps of that training session. If an athlete runs, I'll use the example of a 1-3-5 flying 10, you do this intervention, 2-3 rounds of it, where you go round, or intervention full speed, and their form is just greatly improved, but their time is like a 1:40, which still isn't that much slower. was that a better training session or was that a worse training session? If the quality of their reps improved, you're playing the long game, and this is just trying to speed up that learning process, I guess, of could an athlete potentially benefit from all drills and interventions? Yes, but by being a little bit more intentional about it, I guess you're just trying to accelerate that curve by giving them specifically what they need. And you're not doing it to fix the slowness directly. You're doing it to fix a certain aspect of technique. And I'm just trying to phrase it a few different ways to see whatever clicks for you. And that it's easy to get discouraged as an athlete and also a coach if it doesn't immediately affect an improvement in time. But, whenever we are running through the lasers, I'll go, oh, that was sweet. That was way better. Like what'd you think? And they're like, oh, that was so slow. I was like, no, that was the first time you ever got your knees up in that. Like that was awesome. If we get 4 more reps like that, like this is gonna be an awesome session. Keep it up. So just my experiences as a coach, potentially being discouraged and also athletes, just things to keep in mind. And I know what you're thinking, bro. I have a big team. I can't do this. I can't individualize every little part of it. I have too many athletes. So I understand that. I'm not trying to say that this works for everyone in every situation. And this is better suited for smaller groups and, the private sector. But, even if, let's say, you split up the groups into, everyone runs their 5:15, they're flying 10, they're whatever. You say, that side, that side, that side, that side, that side, that side, that side. This group, thigh split skips. This side, 8 runs in place, 4 seconds. Over time, that's going to add up. Or even if you're just a little bit more conscious / intentional about the feedback, instead of giving your big kind of catch-all cues at the beginning and just like repeating that, well, I'd hope that you'd have the ability to change and kind of read what they're giving you that day to then just influence your feedback to them, or just be a little bit more conscious or intentional about that feedback. So disclaimer number 3. So just because we have all of these tools and interventions and things in our back pockets, sometimes they do all need the same cue, the same drill. And I'm not saying that like just because you can't individualize every single one that you should. Sometimes you do have bigger groups, or sometimes you're on a time crunch, or sometimes you just truly believe that they all need the same thing, or you just want to see how they all respond to the same thing. And sometimes you just got to keep hammering the same drill, the same cue, just the basics, and sometimes you don't say anything, you just have them figure it out. And sometimes you might bounce around a little bit more depending on the athlete and just what you feel comfortable saying and how familiar you are with the athlete, leaving them to their own devices or throwing them a little bit of variation. And this strategy, intervention-based, I guess this is what I'm calling it, intervention-based speed and agility, it's just another tool in the toolbox. It's just another thing in your back pocket to where if you have a smaller group, or if you feel comfortable doing this, or let's say it's phase 3 and everyone has been exposed, to relatively all of your interventions you could pull out. So now you want to get a little bit more specific, and let's say you have found success in having a traditional, you have a pre-drill potentiator, whatever, and then you do your 4 or 5 full speed reps, and then you call it a good training session. I'm not trying to say that this is the only way to do it. I'm saying that I've enjoyed experimenting with this. I've found some success. It's more challenging as a coach, and I not challenge for challenge's sake, but just sharing on something a little bit different that I found some success in that I feel like you kind of might enjoy. Action steps, right? So how do we actually do this? Let's finish this up before my camera. I got about a minute and a half. So write out different interventions you have for different quote-unquote issues or aspects of the sprint, the drill, whatever movement you're doing, kind of like I did in those 2 slides of tables. Whatever you feel comfortable coaching, whatever you've had success with, and not necessarily to be referencing the whole time, but to really like flush out your thoughts. What cues do you use? What cues have you not found success in? And just going through this thought process of like, what drills do I have? What drills do I feel comfortable coaching? What variations would I use for X, Y, and Z? What did I say to a group, and what didn't I say for a group? So I feel like this is potentially just a beneficial exercise just in general, just to kind of like challenge what you believe in, just putting down on pen and paper. Or you can write down the drills, cues that worked well for each athlete. And I know that this might seem a little bit daunting at first, but do it after the session's over. You have your 10 athletes, we did X, Y, Z for these 3, A, B, C, and D for those 4, etc., etc. These are the cues that seem to click. I tried saying this once, didn't really do anything. This drill seemed to really, transfer over to the full speed movement. Or even just, like let's say they walk back for rest, you just make little notes after they do their rep. So imagine if you have, your 10 athletes, 5 athletes, and you have 4 weeks of cues that worked, cues that didn't work, drills that did, and drills that didn't. How much better quality training sessions you're going to be able to provide to them. And if we're going to be as intentional about individualizing the session from an intervention standpoint, well, we might as well, overdo it. And it's easier said than done. I don't know your schedule. I don't know how busy you are, but just something to put out there as an action step to get better at this. Being able to put on pen and paper and if there's a cue that you have to write out, didn't work. Well, are you going to keep using that cue versus just saying it, didn't work, and then it kind of just floats away from the back of your mind, etc., etc. And you just got to practice and do this. Like, I've been doing this for 8 to 10 weeks, or just like intentionally doing it like this. And this is a skill just like being fast itself. Feeling comfortable calling audibles on the fly, and feeling comfortable having all of your athletes and communicating, hey, we're all going to do different things, and just however you want to phrase it. So this style, methodology, whatever we want to call it, of coaching is just as much a skill as being better at this type of coaching as coaching the actual skill itself, if that makes sense. So something a little bit different, not to say that this is the only way to do it, the best way that you should necessarily do it with your athletes. There's definitely context. But where I've been coaching, I found this to be a successful methodology, and just something to change it up, something a little bit more X's and O's, like I said. But I'm very excited to hear your feedback on if it clicked, if it didn't, if you've done something kind of like this, your own successes and failures with it. So that is the end. Yeah. That is the end of my PowerPoint and my podcast. It's good, it's challenging for me to speak my thoughts into existence, what I believe in. And also just, you can go and do this yourself and make some failures along the way, or you can learn from mine. So I hope that this brought a lot of value to you, and thank you very much for your time for listening.